Amber had given up on love, but sparks fly when she meets her father's old friend, Steve, at a barbecue. As their whirlwind romance leads to marriage, everything seems perfect. But on their wedding night, Amber discovers Steve has an unsettling secret that changes everything. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. I pulled up to my parents' house and stared at the line of cars parked across the lawn. What's this all about? I muttered, already bracing myself for whatever family surprise was waiting inside. I grabbed my purse, locked the car, and headed toward the house, hoping it was nothing too chaotic. As soon as I opened the door, the smell of grilled meat hit me, along with the sound of my dad's booming laugh. I walked into the living room and peeked out the back window. Of course, Dad was hosting some kind of impromptu barbecue. The whole backyard was filled with people, most of them from his auto repair shop. Amber, Dad's voice cut through my thoughts as he flipped a burger with that same apron he's had for years. Come on, grab a drink and join us. It's just the guys from work. I tried not to groan. Looks like the whole town's here. I mumbled, slipping off my shoes. Before I could join in the familiar, chaotic atmosphere, the doorbell rang. Dad tossed the spatula down and wiped his hands on his apron. That must be Steve, he said almost to himself. He glanced at me as he reached for the doorknob. You haven't met him yet, right? Before I could even answer, Dad had already flung the door open. Steve, he boomed, giving the guy a solid clap on the back. Come on in, you're just in time. Oh, and meet my daughter, Amber. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. Steve was tall and a little rough around the edges in a ruggedly handsome way, with graying hair and eyes that somehow managed to be both warm and deep. He smiled at me, and I felt this strange flutter in my chest that I wasn't prepared for. Nice to meet you, Amber, he said, offering his hand. His voice was calm and steady. I shook his hand, a little self-conscious about how I must look after driving for hours. Nice to meet you, too. From that point on, I couldn't stop glancing at him. He was the kind of man who made everyone around him comfortable, always listening more than talking. I tried to focus on the conversations around me, but every time our eyes met, I felt this pull. It was ridiculous. I hadn't even been thinking about love or relationships for ages. Not after everything I'd been through. I'd pretty much given up on finding the one and was more focused on work and family. But something about Steve made me want to reconsider, even though I wasn't ready to admit it. As the day wound down, I finally said my goodbyes and headed to my car. Of course, when I tried to start it, the engine sputtered and died. Great, I groaned, slumping back in my seat. I considered going back inside to ask Dad for help, but before I could, there was a knock on my window. It was Steve. Car trouble? He asked, smiling as if this kind of thing happened every day. I sighed. Yeah, it's not starting. I was just going to get my dad, but don't worry about it. Let me take a look, he offered, already rolling up his sleeves. I watched him work, his hands moving with practiced ease. Within a few minutes, my car roared back to life. I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath until I exhaled. There you go, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Should be good now. I smiled, genuinely grateful. Thanks, Steve. I guess I owe you one. He shrugged and gave me a look that made my stomach flip. How about dinner? We can call it even. I froze for a second. Dinner? Was he asking me out? I felt that familiar flicker of doubt, the little voice in the back of my head reminding me of all the reasons I shouldn't say yes. But something in Steve's eyes made me want to take the chance. Yeah, dinner sounds good. And just like that, I agreed. I never would have imagined then that Steve was exactly the man I needed to heal my wounded heart, or how deeply he'd hurt me either. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom, staring at myself in a wedding dress. It was surreal, honestly. After everything I'd been through, I didn't think this day would ever come. I was 39 years old, and I'd given up on the whole fairy tale. But here I was about to marry Steve. The wedding was small, just close family and a few friends. Exactly what we wanted. I remember standing at the altar, looking into Steve's eyes, and feeling this overwhelming sense of calm. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't second-guessing anything. "I do," I whispered, barely able to keep the tears from spilling over. "I do," Steve said back, his voice thick with emotion. And just like that, we were husband and wife. That night, after all the congratulations and hugs, we finally got some alone time. Steve's house, our house now, was quiet, the room still unfamiliar to me. I slipped into the bathroom to change into something more comfortable, my heart full and light. But the minute I slipped back into the bedroom, I was greeted by a shocking sight. Steve was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me, talking softly to someone who wasn't there. My heart skipped a beat. "I wanted you to see this, Stace. Today was perfect. I just wish you could have been here." His voice was soft, full of emotion. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "Steve." My voice sounded small, unsure. He turned around slowly, guilt flickering across his face. And our Amber, I stepped closer, the air between us thick with unspoken words. Who are you talking to?" He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I was talking to Stacy, my daughter." I stared at him, the weight of his words slowly sinking in. He told me he'd had a daughter. I knew she had died, but I didn't know about this. "She died in a car accident with her mom," he continued, his voice strained. "But sometimes I talk to her. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like she's still here with me. Especially today. I wanted her to know about you. I wanted her to see how happy I am." I didn't know what to say. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't quite catch my breath. Steve's grief was raw, a living thing between us, and it made everything feel heavy. But I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel angry. Just so sad. Sad for him, for everything he'd lost, and the way he'd been carrying it all alone. His grief hurt me as though it were my own. I sat down beside him, my hand finding his. "I get it," I said softly. "Ido, you're not crazy, Steve. You're grieving." He let out a shaky breath, looking at me with such vulnerability that it nearly broke my heart. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want to scare you away." "You're not scaring me away," I said, squeezing his hand. "We all have things that haunt us, but we're in this together now. We can carry this together." Steve's eyes welled up with tears, and I pulled him into a hug, feeling the weight of his pain, his love, his fear, all of it wrapped up in that moment. Maybe we can talk to someone about it. A therapist, maybe. It doesn't have to be just you and Stacy anymore." He nodded against my shoulder, his grip on me tightening. "I've thought about it. I just didn't know how to start. Thank you for understanding, Amber. I didn't know how much I needed this." I pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes, my heart swelling with a love deeper than I'd ever known. "We'll figure it out, Steve. Together." And as I kissed him, I knew we would. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and for the first time, that felt like enough. But that's the thing about love, isn't it? It's not about finding some perfect person without any scars. It's about finding someone whose scars you're willing to share.